Thank you so much for joining us for our discussion on health and well-being at work. I'm Stephanie Chang, and I'm the Global Editorial Director of The Trust, the custom content studio and creative consultancy of the Wall Street Journal Barron's Group. COVID-19 has forced the fast and widespread shift to remote working around the world. While the home office may be here to stay, forward-thinking companies are creating physical working environments that balance safety, health, and sustainability, and reimagine the employee experience in a whole new way. We're here today to explore the role technology plays in helping shape this new experience in a post-pandemic world. Please welcome my panelists from NTT today: Mary Edwards, President, Healthcare Provider, NTT Data Services; Joe Alexander, MD and PhD, Distinguished Scientist, Medical and Health Informatics at NTT Research; and Alex Bennett, Senior Vice President, Intelligent Workplace, NTT Limited. So thanks to the three of you for joining me in conversation today. So given the dramatic shifts we've experienced in how we work, live, and learn, I wanted to ask you, what were the most significant technology changes and investments that NTT saw with the companies that you work with when the pandemic hit? And Mary, I'll start with you, as I'm interested to hear about the changes that you saw in the healthcare industry.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. And as you know, my role at NTT is to lead our team serving health systems. Some of the largest hospital and medical systems in the US are among our clients. And I first would just like to say how grateful we are to be serving this industry in these times, and how grateful we are for all of their care professionals, and how proud I am of our team, many of whom worked in the care arenas alongside caregivers during the pandemic, as we continue to do today. So we know, these were the companies under some of the most significant stress and duress as the pandemic hit and moved across the country. Not only was their business impacted, like many others, dramatic shifts to top and bottom lines, but their employees were putting themselves at risk daily in the care arena, serving the community, serving all of us. And that certainly, brought its own challenges. In most emergencies, the first tech we see put to good use is duct tape, right? But we moved to virtual everything overnight, not just traditional telehealth visits, but virtual applied to patient rounding, care conferences, family visitations, even final goodbyes. I know scrappy health systems out there who were literally duct taping iPads to IV poles to facilitate all of these types of virtual interactions. And at the same time, hospitals, like every other company, made a massive move to work from home, which was done in an instant and as well as it could be. Companies are still working to address that stress to the system, the need for scalability for new and different parts of the infrastructure, new security, what we call no trust security, because you really have to approach security as if you can't trust anybody or anything. New device management, new devices, new business processes, and new policies. So all of this emerged as the type of investments companies had to make in an instant. And they're continuing to make those investments today.
Thanks, Mary. Yeah, and Alex, I wanted to ask you the same question and just see if you have any client examples of some of the changes and investments that you've seen.
Yeah, I mean, speaking to what Mary said there, overall it was really interesting because NTT is a global company. We actually engaged in China when it first happened, almost at December, January earlier this year. And as it started to spread into Asia, we started to get some learnings and how could we actually put together some packages around the basics of business continuity. So what is a secure remote worker and what do we need? And by the time it started to come into Europe and into the Americas, we were learning from that. So from a technology standpoint, it was the basics from day one. It was networking, connectivity. Mary mentioned about devices. Lots of people started to move to say, actually, we've been progressing to this idea of digitization, moving to the cloud. those themes have been there prior to the pandemic, but this really accelerated a number of those key areas. So for collaboration, how do we actually get business continuity of our employees that are now all working from home, or the vast majority? How do we make them connect? How do we get them access to applications to carry out their job? So we saw VPNs being driven very quickly in the first phase. But as people started to transition and actually looked at new cloud-based computing, they obviously changed their security policy. They started to understand about compliance. So one of the companies that we worked with is a large events organization. They put on very large scale events into industry sectors. And we had to actually support them flip their whole business model almost overnight to say, well, those people aren't going to be there, but how do we actually put that into a virtual environment onto our digital events platform? And how do we manage that? So we actually had to really look at, how do we work with their HR team? How do we actually encourage their employees to work in a new way to create that new event in a new way on a new technology, and how would you deliver that? And then make sure that other parts of the functional business understood what the purpose was, and then start to deliver that in a managed service. So they continue to have their brand excellence, but just delivered in a new way.
Great. And Alex, I know that NTT did a workplace report recently. Yeah. Just wondering if you can talk about that and how that sort of guided what NTT is doing to help with the changes that these companies are making.
Yeah, we started to plan for that research at the start of the year, and we actually carried out a lot of the interviews. It's to 1,350 C-suite and leaders across IT, HR, operations, facilities management. So we really wanted to have the breadth of view of, from a workplace standpoint, it's actually not just about technology. It encompasses everything around culture, purpose, and technology underpins that. But one of the interesting facts was that 90% of the respondents said that technology had fundamentally been an important enabler for them as they continue to battle against these changes. However, only 45% of them felt as though they actually had the right technology to move them to the next step. So that again goes to what Mary was saying, as almost a band-aid, recalibrate, look at what we need to do. Is it secure? Is it compliant? What do we get to the next stage to increase that efficiency? And we've done that across multiple industry sectors, looking at how do you address retail, how do you move online to make sure that ultimately they're giving shareholder value, or into healthcare, how do we make sure we bring and connect people together as well?
Thanks, Alex. And Mary, I wanted to ask you, more specifically about how NTT has helped, the changes that you've seen NTT make, not just in healthcare, but I think you had mentioned an interesting example in the auto industry. So just wondering if you could.
Yeah, sure. Well, we did things we've always done. Alex and I both referred to, networks, infrastructure, device management, things like that. And we did new things to help, all in dramatically reduced timeframes. We created a bot, for instance, named Amelia, in under a week for AskMD, that fielded hundreds of thousands of calls coming into their call centers on COVID symptoms and appropriate responses to those symptoms. We helped our clients, especially those who had to establish additional call center capabilities for virtual visits, rapidly scale to answer the calls through our technical and clinical service desk. These were calls that were coming from, lab technicians or radiologists who were moved into the ER in the most dramatically impacted areas of the country, up in the Northeast in particular. And we're having to work with new and different, technology. And we are also having to quickly ramp up services for patients who now needed to know how to connect to get to their virtual visit. So all of those things are things that, we've done with high performance for a very long time. We helped governments then implement contact tracing. We leveraged our IoT depth to implement back to work solutions and back to school solutions. As you mentioned, we have sensors that can detect heat, and we use a lot of that technology in the city of Las Vegas. And so, how do you bring that technology into a back to work scenario where you can detect fever in a crowd? You have AI-enabled cameras that can detect the absence or presence of face masks. Can you connect that in such a way that your key card works to let you in the building as long as you don't have a fever and as long as you have a face mask on? And at the same time, to what Alex was talking about, we're helping our teams adjust to the new demands of working from home, the isolation that comes with that. For our care teams, the elongated, stress, right, that comes with working in those care arenas. And we've got to provide solutions to our leaders to help them identify and deal with the emotional toll this can have on our people. So, we're able to help our clients by understanding the things we need to do for ourselves and quickly offering that as solutions that they may take advantage of themselves.
I mean, Mary, if I can jump in, I think it's a really interesting area because the pandemic has been so emotive and it's just been such a drastic and terrible thing. But a lot of the decisions that are being made now are going to have an impact for a generation to come. So the way in which you're going to architect your technology, you might think that's a quick band-aid, but actually can have a very negative impact into how you look at the key aspects of data. And one of the things we're trying to say back into the clients that we have is almost, what is your North Star? Where do you want your business to go to? What does your brand represent? And from that, everything can flow back and data is going to become key. So actually making sure that an architecture of extensibility, how do all of those systems speak with one another? So you can actually build that idea of a digital twin or a digital lake where you can gain insights from that and make actions. And Mary, you mentioned there about back to office. We're doing this as NTT. We have close to 600 locations across the world where we have our employees. We have a duty of care to our employees, but we've also got to audit who's coming back in and how many people based on the regulations of every country, which is different. So data will dictate how many people are allowed to go into one building based by the size of the physical location. You've then got to allow an employee to feel engaged and empowered to book their time back into that location if they're allowed to do so. And then you've got to be able to audit or who came in on what day and have they gone through that sort of view of signing the declaration of health. And from that, if you have people buying different applications in different countries, you will have lots of disparate, siloed data points where you can't actually plan for the future correctly. So it's been quite a big cultural thing to have conversations with clients about thinking about that at the core and then drive those emotive topics to it as well.
I had a question for Joe. Joe, I'm just wondering, from where you sit as a scientist, we're seeing the pivot happening for organizations from the many challenges of today, and wondering how those will shift to opportunities for tomorrow and how you feel that NTT is helping with that aspect.
Thank you so much, Stephanie. And thanks, Alex and Mary. I would say that the changes required to address the acute necessities of the pandemic have created an unexpected but substantial opportunity to upgrade the reality of how we go about our respective businesses. This has tremendous impacts and implications for the future. And one area that I'm thinking about is at-home patient monitoring and remote sensing. I was just messaging the other day with a CEO who runs a company where they're commercializing so-called morphic sensors for wearable devices. And these sensors are able to sense a range of biometrics data that are typically not possible to measure. Technologies like that applied to chronic disease management, such as chronic heart failure, can dramatically reduce the need for immediate rehospitalizations after discharge for such patients.
Thanks. And Joe, curious when you hear the term digital reinvention, what would you say that means to you?
In the pivot from today's challenges to tomorrow's opportunities, I would say that digital reinvention is the axis upon which that pivot would turn. I see digital reinvention as a kind of rapid evolution where we must reimagine and reshape ourselves to function in a new paradigm, such as what has happened here with the pandemic. And that paradigm has potential to disrupt old school ways of doing things as much as I'm an old school kind of person. I lead the Biodigital Twin Initiative, where we create digital replicas of patients and aim to understand and get real-time insights into all that is known or knowable about a particular patient so that we can better enable care and clinical decision-making. And I see a tremendous opportunity now to digitally reinvent medicine because we now will have the capability of sharing data across the healthcare continuum to different providers that a patient will encounter. And we can take advantage of so-called Internet of Medical Things, if you will, wearable devices, artificial intelligence, deep learning, big data analytics, and telemedicine. So all of these come to bear as kind of necessary elements of the digital reinvention from my perspective.
Thank you. And Mary, I have the same question for you. What would you say digital reinvention means for you? And has your view of that changed at all since the pandemic?
Yeah, you know, about 18 months ago at NTT, we reimagined the health system of the future, and it was much, much different. So well before the pandemic. And the implication of that health system of the future was a massive reduction in physical plant requirements in favor of virtualized, AI-enabled, care from anywhere, home, predominant site of care in the future. And we thought that might be a decade away, right? And then the pandemic actually, we're feeling is accelerating the industry's progression to that future. So really it means we reimagine work, we reimagine the employee experience. We've talked about reimagining the consumer experience for a very long time across all industries. But this is really changing the way the world works and lives. And there's no place more than in our health systems where the health, safety, and well-being of employees was incredibly challenged, where we learned lessons quickly. So we had to tend to emotional well-being more proactively, assist our leaders with tools and understanding to know how to check in with employees and to provide, stress relief to care arena employees as well as those in isolation. And there's a lesson in that. The way we work has and will continue to change. And the coping skills we've developed over generations of office-based work need to be reinvented for virtual work. So it's not just the digital reinvention of the tech and what that means, but it's also about how humans come to work, interact around work, and we're excited to be working in all of those areas.
Mary, I mean that's such a strong point there. I mean, I was on a call earlier today with a client, and we were talking about some of the technology areas around workplace of the future, which came back 2 years ago, and the number one priority was around workflows like bots. How do we use automation? How do we extract cost? And from the workplace report, the number one factor was employee experience and well-being. So that emotive view of actually people are the important aspect. Intellectual property is driven by people and how they interpret data. So the better the data, the better you give your people, your brand, the ability to make decisions. So that's really where my view of digital reinvention comes in. It's much about having a culture and driving a purpose and then using that. And for us at NTT, that extends this opportunity to look at the change in business models, to look at sustainability. Now, we're the business avenger for the UN Sustainability Goals, number 11, around sustainable cities and also communities. And that ties into this whole view of well-being of people and therefore well-being of employees, from healthy buildings, intelligent buildings, all the way through to what Joe was talking about from the digital twin, and how do those come together to affect a positive change. And I know there's some questions coming in that raises the whole question of data, passive data, active data, personal information. How do you look at that for the benefit of an individual and people, rather than the big brother view of actually with that data we can affect some negative changes as well. And we have a duty of care to look at that as a business, but also work with our clients to understand what their risk and compliance components are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are getting questions, and I would, ask the audience to please do keep bringing those questions in. We're gonna, I have a few more, and then we're gonna break over to the audience questions. I just wanted to talk about telehealth for a little bit. Mary, I'm just curious, do you see that telehealth as being the bridge to widespread remote and digital healthcare, and what are the implications on businesses?
Sure. Well, I think, you talk about it being the bridge, and telehealth is kind of the match, right? And COVID is the fuel, right? Telehealth, that match had been lit for some time. It was really struggling to ignite, and COVID fueled this rapid rise in telehealth. And that's now demanding that adjoining processes be digitized as well. And it's expanding our perspective about what, virtual means, right? We have traditionally thought about it as a doctor-patient interaction, but as I mentioned earlier, it's about virtual care conferences, virtual patient rounding, all kinds of applications of virtual that go beyond the telehealth visit. And something that we've been focused on in Nucleus for Healthcare, that reimagining of healthcare for the future, is how you connect all of those kinds of journeys, business processes, opportunities that are about the patient, and the data that comes from all of those interactions, and ensures that it's connected in an end-to-end patient journey. And it's not just about the patient journey when the patient is ill. It's about doing things that can assist patients in wellness. So we have work with something called GBO. It's a virtual care companion. It can be employed in to bring patients out of isolation, to create community and connection and dialogue where it's difficult to get that for some of our some of the folks who don't have the ability to visit, have family, etc. So lots of applications that I think telehealth and that whole virtual world are bringing forward to the noon.
Yeah, and Joe, I'm curious to hear from you about your take on telehealth, and specifically some of the technologies that support the success of that. Like, which ones are you excited about?
Thank you very much, Stephanie. I'm a very big fan of telehealth because, for one thing, it means that the widespread remote access to healthcare means better care for the elderly and especially physically impaired. But it's also for remote regions of the world that are lacking in healthcare infrastructure, and in some ways lacking just in basic good healthcare information because it's changing so rapidly. I'm excited to belong to Entity Research, Inc. because we have groups that are working in information security, encryption and blockchain, quantum computing, and also medical and health informatics, to which I belong. And all of these work to support the future of telehealth and telemedicine. Now, the significance of data security in telemedicine is obvious, but quantum computing offers the promise of literally a quantum leap forward in computational speed. And this means processing much more healthcare information and data of various types: imaging data, genomics data, digital and soluble biomarker data. But also, because of speed, it will be possible to use more advanced applications in artificial intelligence and deep learning, all of which will revolutionize diagnostics and accelerate the power, impact, and quality of telehealth.
Okay, thank you. I want to make sure we have some time for the questions, so I'm going to jump to my final question, then we'll take some audience questions. So Mary, you've been in the healthcare industry for 30 years. What are you most excited about in terms of advances in healthcare through technology?
Yeah. Oh, well, number one, I'm excited to still be in it, right? And especially at this time, so much of what we've imagined over the years has taken a long time to come to fruition in healthcare. Even, everyone will say that healthcare tends to lag other industries, whether it's some of the technology we've talked about here today, certainly journey to the cloud, right? And there's so many things that can be leveraged from different parts of industry that will have immediate and application for good in healthcare. So I'm just happy to continue to be in the game after all of those years. I won't mention how many again, but all that time, and really excited, as is the rest of my team, to be at the front of the change that's taking place across the healthcare industry.
Alex, how about you? What are you most excited about?
It's just a total change in how workplace is going to happen, Stephanie. I mean, it's the distributed workforce now. I think everyone's still grappling with how they do their HR policy. What do they give, into their benefits package? Now they're working at home as well. And obviously, very different for industry sectors. But my view is, now is such a fantastic time. I think we've got so many things, and again, the sustainability piece. I think ESG and that sort of environment sustainability goals, embedding that into your corporate policy and thinking about people and driving the outcomes around well-being has proven to give productivity gains and profitability gains. So having a purpose that's the right thing to do for society is actually also driving the profitability for shareholders and the organizations.
Jill, same question for you.
Thank you. I would say that I'm most excited about the future of medicine, to see individuals' lives brighten as a result of more effective and personalized care. This will come about through precision medicine and predictive health maintenance. And what we have now is a moonshot pursuit of, as I see it, fully autonomous closed loop therapeutics, where the dynamics of effective care derive from one's own biodigital twin. The way it will work is that there will be smart sensors that will continuously update the patient's biodigital twin on patient status and ongoing responses to interventions. And based on that information, there will be smart actuators, smart robotics, nano devices that will deliver those optimal therapies, whether they be combinations of pharmaceuticals, medical devices, or some type of treatment like neuromodulation, which is used in the treatment of heart failure. For many years, physician thought leaders have talked about P4 medicine, and those Ps being personalized, predictive, preventive, and participatory. And I see the biodigital twin as the personalized part of that equation. And we fully intend to empower patients to participate in their own care, the participatory element. And those two taken together make the other two, predictive and preventive maintenance of health, realizable. So that's how I see it, Stephanie.
Okay, great. I think we have a little bit of time to take a couple of questions. So one of the questions is, are you worried about the cybersecurity risk of gathering so much health data? Who wants to take that one?
I'll start, and then, my esteemed colleagues, I'm just so impressed to be on the panel with the two of you. I know you'll pipe in, but of course, right? The answer is of course. And we'd all be foolish not to be concerned. And, I mentioned, our zero trust kind of approach to security. It comes out of that concern. But that won't stop the progression of data sharing. It's, we've talked about it for a very long time. 10 years ago, would you have imagined the kind of data that's now being shared across the healthcare industry, or imagined the kind of security frameworks that are available to protect? So, yeah.
I'll add to Mary's there, and probably also just extending that out just to data in general is, how do you anomalize the data to just look at all of the information and see trends and actually take that PI component out of it? And then where personal information is required, how do you have a totally separate architecture and design to make sure that is as airtight as possible going forward? And obviously we all have to do that because of GDPR and other compliance requirements as well. But I think it's something we wake up every day, and from a cybersecurity standpoint, NTT obviously being a thought leader in this area, it's something we're continuing to do and looking at threat intelligence on a every minute of the day.
And as I mentioned before, at NTT Research Inc., we have a group that's specifically focused on encryption and blockchain and even quantum encryption, because from where I sit, from the biodigital twin perspective, data security is tremendously important, especially if we think about fully autonomous closed loop therapeutics, where we will be delivering care autonomously without the need for a physician in the loop. Then that data security, both in terms of data received and data sent out, is tremendously important.
Okay, great. We have a question about how will management change in the workplace? Do we think it will be more in tune with personal employees' needs?
I mean, I can jump in and take that one because it's a lot of it came out of the workplace report as well, and it comes back to that view of culture. I think you've got to start empowering your employees and giving trust to them. And we're seeing a lot of the more successful companies set HR policy around giving flexibility. So even if you think of distributed working, some companies will say, well, you're allowed 2 days at home. Actually, what you should say, you know, we want to motivate you to come back in, but you choose how you come back in. It's activity-based working. You know, give them the policy that they'll set up their own tribes, agile teams. You know, you make the decision, and then the technology enables them into that area. So that purpose and culture, I think, is a really important thing. And policy helps define it, but ultimately the individuals should be creating how they work together. So it's becoming more agile, more autonomous in how they make decisions.
Okay,
Yeah.
Great. Oh, do you want to add something there?
I think about all the things that are different about the way we work at NTT now, how more present leadership is, even though we're virtual, how often we're with each other. And it's really been a change for good as far as I'm concerned. And certainly our ability to bring more information to more people into the circle, right, than you could have done when we were in a physical or geographically based presence. So I do think leaders are going to have to figure out how to lead differently, how to be more present in different ways, how to connect outside of hierarchy and place, right? I think those are important lessons we'll learn.
We have a question about telemedicine and wondering if you think that we can maintain the same level of quality of care to patients with telemedicine that that they receive.
Yeah, well, I think over where we're moving with work is where medicine will move. Place is important in certain circumstances, and where quality can't be delivered in the same way over virtual, then place will be as important as it was before. But there's so much about medicine that doesn't require place in the same way. So I don't really think it's a compromise. You look at, wound care and cameras and the ability to avoid the 45-minute, commute in New York City, right? 3 blocks long commute in New York City to go get wound care. When now there's technology, you can snap a picture, send it, and they can, day by day see the progression of, the wound healing. And they can know when it's important to come to the place, right? Based on that progression.
Mm-hmm. Okay, we have another question. The moonshots sound fantastic, but how will we make it all accessible to everyone, socioeconomic and ethnic diversity, keeping that in mind?
And again, I can jump in first if you want, just from a general standpoint. And again, if I take it from that view of, our position as the business Avenger around UN sustainability goals, one thing we're doing now is speaking to all the other business Avengers. So all the corporations, I think, have a duty now to say, right, how do we actually work together and move forward? And something we're doing is creating this idea of a consortium. So how do some of the clients that we work with in the banking industry help fund part of this activity? Now, how do we then look at consultants to help actually drive that from an energy standpoint? Now, some of our clients are really moving to renewable energy. How do they participate in this? And actually, how do we do that? And that we feel if we can take the leading edge, others will start to believe in this. It's like the 30% of employees you get over that, everyone starts to get motivated. And I think that's the way we need to go forward. And I know there's another question from Richard, which was about, how do you then get people to learn about that? I think if you can drive from a corporate standpoint, all of those standpoints, everyone learns. We are all part of the community, we're all part of society, then that should actually change from a city standpoint as you start to then impart your views on where you live.
Yeah, I would just reflect on something Joe said earlier about, rural communities, people who aren't at work, aren't in an employment situation, and how do we leverage all of this technology to provide socioeconomic benefit to them. And in healthcare, simply healthcare, right? There are many, many health institutions who are mission oriented, who have a mission to provide care to adversely affected communities. And with virtual, you have reach that you didn't have before. And we've had virtual for a long time, but having it, seamless in our care systems and processes actually extend its reach to the communities that Joe mentioned earlier in his comments.
And I completely agree with Mary, and I should preface by saying I am a moonshot type of person, but I see telehealth itself, telemedicine, it's all about accessibility. And the more information that we can take advantage of, and the more smart analytics we can use, and the more quickly we can deliver that information to where it's being used, then for me, it's all about accessibility. Now, we need to do some work in moving toward the future, and this is the moonshot aspect, is to be able to take best advantage in terms of data security and speed. But for me, we, in reaction to something like this pandemic, we're doing more and more to make healthcare particularly accessible. So it's a very good question. And
it's also doing the right thing, right, Joe?
That's right.
I mean, it's, again, we're all commercial businesses, but ultimately, if we look at healthcare, one thing NTT did was through our threat intelligence saw significant rise in data breaches into healthcare sector. So we decided as a organization to say, well, we'll actually provide that cybersecurity free of charge into different healthcare organizations and governments across the world to actually stop that impact. So I think it comes back to the view of what's your purpose as a business and making sure that you can actually add value.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you so much, Mary, Alex, and Joe, for a great deep dive into this topic. And thanks to our audience for attending. Just wanted to say that the main stage program will begin at 2:00 with the CEO of Oyo Hotels and Homes. And in the meantime, you can join us for 5 minutes of standing yoga, explore the digital activations in the hub, grab a virtual coffee, or catch up with attendees in the networking area. And we'll see you soon back on the main stage. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.